We have Sam Bonello on the line with us. He's a financial educator, and he's going to be helping us to understand a little bit more about the current impacts of the rise in global oil prices for the everyday Australian budget. Good morning to you, Sam. It's great to have you with us.
Good morning.
All right, Sam, have you been, fueling your vehicle lately, or are you into electric cars and you're not being affected by this crisis at all?
No, unfortunately, I've entertained the idea of an electric car previously, but it's back on the radar this week. But my bigger issue is I've actually got a trucking business now. And so
wow, okay.
Our diesel bills are $400 a day and now $500 a day.
$400 a day and move to $500 a day. Wow, that is a significant
And we have a little
increase.
truck. We have a little truck. The big trucks that people see on the highway that are moving their lettuce and their, coffee pods and all the things that we use every day, their prices would be, or their volumes are even higher, much higher.
Yeah. Wow. So Sam, tell us a little bit about the impact. Like, how much dependent on petrol are we, like, on average? Like ordinary people. Let's not talk about businesses yet, because as you're saying, some businesses, they are very heavily impacted and dependent on oil prices, aren't they?
Yeah. So look, the answer is very. Even if we're not a business that's, say, a trucking company that obviously has to fill up large tanks every day, all of the food that we eat, all of the things that we purchase, whether it's a necessity or a, discretionary spend on a new appliance, everything gets transported. And especially here in Australia, there's very little rail transport and there's very little local manufacturing. So the ships that bring stuff from overseas, the trucks that take it from the port to the grocery store, and then, of course, our fuel tank or the courier's fuel tank to get it from the stores where we purchase it to our door, we're all burning, fossil fuels at every stage of that process. So with the global oil price increasing, significantly, every single one of the people in that supply chain have either got to absorb that cost or pass that along. And the other part of it is it's not just transport of finished goods, but in the case of foodstuffs and fibre, farmers who are in regional areas where these price effect on fuel is even higher because the cost of transporting the fuel out to, the outback or inland Australia where things are grown for us, their costs go up. The other thing with food is urea, which is a very common fertiliser, for better or worse, is a petroleum-based fertiliser, and that cost goes up. So all the way through the supply chain of things that we use every day, people are having to use fossil fuels to produce that, to transport that and get it to us. And they either pass that cost along or they absorb it. And I heard just the other day that like trucking companies are running on about a 3% profit margin. So there's not really any room for them to absorb an increase in fuel prices. So they're going to pass that on very quickly. And that's where we'll feel it.
So there's basically almost nothing we can think of that is not impacted by fuel prices. So what does that represent to the average Australian household? How much more money are we going to be spending?
We don't know yet because it depends how long this lasts. There'll be a time lag in food and, delivery costs and whatnot. It'll be a bit of time before we really see that and sense that. But I just did the numbers before, Ford Ranger is a common car. They've got a 70-litre tank of fuel. Mm-hmm. If you were using a tank of fuel a week, you're now paying, $50 to $60 more to fill that vehicle.
Wow.
The only ones that really aren't affected in the short term, Joseph, are smart people that have got an e-vehicle.
All right. Well, but even then, you're saying, look up. Yeah, I happen to do know because I own like an electric vehicle, so I
stop bragging.
Feeling a little bit richer or less poor, but at the same time, I think but everything else is getting expensive. So because yes, direct buying of fuel is one item in the list. But as you mentioned, everything gets that because, our trucks that are transporting things, they are not electric. They're not solar powered. So it's going to affect everybody's budgets.
The tractors that are being used to grow food.
So it's only, perhaps saving that, $50 or $60 a week at the moment. Is anything we can do to minimize this impact or really just to kind of embrace it and there's nothing much we can do?
Look, I mean, you could go all the way to growing your own veggies, so you're not paying someone else's transport and fertilizer costs. But for busy families, most of us in Australia live in urban and cities. There's not a whole lot. So when it comes to managing the impact of price rises that are really out of our control, the lever that we have to pull is where do we spend and what do we spend on. So, if your tank of fuel is costing $60 extra, well, that might be the cafe on a Sunday where there is a 10% surcharge, and that evens out the budget. If people are blessed to be in the position where they have discretionary spending, my perspective is we have an extremely good quality of living here in Australia, and people enjoy a lot of non-essentials. Mm-hmm. If you're blessed to be in that category, which many of us are, it's fairly easy to trim the budget. Where it really is going to hurt is where people don't have a lot of discretionary spending that they can trim, and they've got a long commute to work, and that $50, $60 extra or whatever it might be for them has to come out of, an essential
something
spending
essential.
Piece.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I guess one option with urban environments is if the public transport's reliable where you are, buy a book and sit on the train instead of sitting in traffic.
Yes.
But yeah, everyone's situation's different, Joseph. Kids have got sport, kids have got after school activities, all of that sort of stuff. It's not that easy to just cut things out.
Yeah. What I wanted to know from our listeners, Sam, is that how is this effect in oil prices impacting your budget? Are you already thinking about not doing something? I'm thinking I'm going to have to eat less and less outside, and I have to just start preparing more of my meals at home as one way that I can use to save my budgets a little bit. But what other ways is this impacting you? Let us know here, 0491 064 669. How is that impacting you? Are you going to have to go without something? Or you're not planning to make any changes? Let us know here. We're going to, if you send the message in the next 2 minutes, we can even relay them on to Sam, and he can comment them on air. Sam, we also have been seeing that the RBA is, talking about inflation rising up, hiking up to 5%. I have seen news talking about that if prices don't go down, and Iran has promised that they're going to keep disrupting the oil traffic in the Hormuz Strait. Just yesterday, 5 ships were attacked. They were trying to break that blockade. There are now reports that they are also launching maritime sea mines, which are very, very difficult to remove. And if the prices goes to $200 per barrel, which is a definite possibility, some analysts are even considering that Australia can get into a recession. Now, I don't think that we have experienced a recession in many decades. So what do we do if that happens? Now, interest rates are hiking up. There's less and less activity in the economy. People are just not wanting to buy, as you mentioned, the non-essential so much. They have to limit those. What do you do in the times in periods of recession? How can we still get ahead financially in those times, or just have to brace until things go beautiful again?
Look, I would share just a technical definition of a recession is not as scary as what I think many people think of when they hear that word. Mm-hmm. I think the word association recession, they swap the R for a D and they think depression. Mm-hmm. A recession is just 2 quarters, so 2 3-month periods of negative economic growth. So if it wasn't announced on the news, most people wouldn't even know we've had recession.
Okay.
So it's it's a concern over the long term, but if there's 2 quarters of short-term period, 2 quarters of negative growth, it's not the end of the world. I think in some ways, Joseph, it might be a two-edged sword in that if people feel that, that wealth effect where we feel poor because, prices are going up, we notice it at the pump, we notice it at the grocery store, and we start spending less on the discretionary things. Australia's had an amazing ability to keep on spending even with these economic headwinds, and that's part of what drives inflation. The other part is obviously the government creating enough new jobs to fill the MCG. So there's a lot of wages tied up in there, and they've got to get that money from somewhere. So we're not in control of that one. I saw an illustration yesterday. The number of government jobs that have been created in the last 4 years is so large that all those new employees would not fit into some of our biggest sporting stadiums.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Wow.
So every week, wages are being paid to support that number of people. And obviously that money has to come from somewhere, and that contributes significantly to inflation.
I see.
Yeah.
So the blessing in disguise might be that as we all feel poor, we stop spending, and that slows down, the economy a little bit, and inflation would follow. But just clarify the question for me again, Joseph.
Yeah. So the question is like, can we let's say that businesses are starting to do poorly. We have to kind of really tighten our seat belts, our belts to spend less with the discretionary expenses. Are we still able to get ahead financially, or is that going to also chew into our savings? What would be your tips so that we can still save money and look after our future? And let's say, what would be your top tips? Let's say that someone said, look, I want to save $5,000 or $10,000 this year. What would be the principles or your top tips for that?
So I think two categories of people, so that I'm not being insensitive here to those that don't have any discretionary spending. Those without any discretionary spending that are really living paycheck to paycheck, and there's nothing else they can cut. It's what can you do to increase your income? Is it a second job? Is it staying up late at night and doing a TAFE course or some sort of course that increases your earning potential? There's always a lever that you can pull, but increasing your income is a much harder lever to pull than decreasing your spending. So for people that do have discretionary spending, it's just print out your bank balance for the last month or the last 3 months and just go through it line by line, asking the question, did I need to do that? Mm-hmm. Is there something else I could have done with the kids on a Sunday and made memories that didn't cost me, $200 to go to the animal park with everyone, or, $100 to go and eat out on Saturday night because we felt lazy and we didn't want to cook. Going through that, obviously there's things that people can sell oftentimes. One of the good things is people still like to buy. That's a bit of an addictive process. And so things like Marketplace, Gumtree, etc., the classifieds, they can actually do well because people are looking for things at a cheaper price. And so if you've got stuff that's laying around the house, stow it in the garage, you haven't touched it for years, now's a good time to start selling it, and you can use the proceeds from that to put towards your war chest. But it requires focus, it requires a bit of energy, and really starting with knowing what your expenses are, Joseph.
Yeah, no, that's a good tip. By the way, Sam and I, we recorded a series of podcasts that talk about the essentials that you need to do, all the things that your school, your parents should have taught you, but they couldn't because they didn't know or they didn't have the time. Sam and I do these, have this podcast. It's called the 2 Cents Podcast. We have 5 or 6 episodes and they are up online. If you would like the link to that one, you can text us here, #2cents, and we'll send you the link, or you can just Google online. You can go to the Apple Podcasts store and you can look for 2 Cents Podcast with Sam Bonello and Joseph Scaff. You'll find it there. I think a lot of people, actually we got messages from people from all over the globe, haven't we, Sam? That were thanking, this podcast for what it has done for them. So even though we created it for an Australian perspective, for an Australian public, I think we have had listeners from Saudi Arabia, from America, from Africa, from all kinds of interesting places.
Joseph, I'll just add a point. I'm not sure how we're going for time, but just before we
have more time.
I would say this, this is Faith FM. A lot of our listeners are either believers in Jesus or exploring that avenue. I would encourage people not to miss this opportunity to grow your faith. The headlines are, a little daunting at the moment, a little concerning, both geopolitically but also budgetarily. It can be easy for us to fall into fear, doubt. Just think of those passages, Jesus says that not a sparrow falls without him knowing about it. And that the grass withers and the fields are dressed in flowers and they don't toil or spin. The Lord provides for them. The Lord also provides for us. And during these times where all these headlines are negative and concerning financially, it can be really tempting to modify our giving. Or we say, if we stop returning tithe, there's an extra 10% in the budget. Maybe that'll cover the fuel increase. Please don't be tempted to do that, because you lose a more valuable opportunity to grow your faith. And living in the end times, as I believe we are, growing our faith is an essential thing. And it's not always reading more and praying more. It's experiencing the Lord's provision, trusting the Lord more, so that you've got that living relationship and that memory bank of how the Lord worked in your behalf. So don't miss this opportunity to grow your faith. Don't cower in fear and start reducing your giving through tithe and offering. Be faithful, be generous, because ultimately God is our provider, not the fuel pump or the government or anybody else in the economic system.
That's really well said. And I'm also a big believer, Sam, that God teaches so much about faith in that arena of money. We actually had a message here from Suzanne. Suzanne said, our church runs a free community meal, cheap pantry, and free vegetables, bread, etc. We have had our highest numbers of people coming through the door last night. I expect more people will be accessing these kinds of services over the coming weeks. We're also running cooking demonstrations and dinner based on cooking on a budget. And we are hoping to assist our community to this time. What do you think about these kinds of initiatives, Sam?
I think they're fantastic. I think they're a little challenging, the food banks. A lot of people, are working 9 to 5, which is the time that those food banks are open. But certainly, batch cooking, spending some time on a Sunday where you plan your budget and you have a few meals that you can make out of the one, set of cheaper ingredients. All of those things, yeah, absolutely. Money saved is better than money earned because you don't have to pay tax on it. But you've still got to work for it. You've got to spend some time and plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, thank you very much. And look, we are approaching the end of our interview here. And you mentioned, you gave us some really wise words. One question here, just very, very briefly, if you can ask. So why do we need to pay more for petrol in Australia or in other countries globally if this crisis is only affecting, let's say, a certain specific part of the world? Why oil prices all over the globe increase when the Hormuz Strait is closed? Can you give us just like a 30-second or a 40-second answer to that one?
Yeah, I'm not an energy supply chain expert by any means, but I have been curious about the same thing and I've done some reading. So the stats are about 20% of global oil comes through the Straits of Hormuz, which is a lot of oil out of the Gulf states. And some of that oil, the oil out of Iran, has been sanctioned by a lot of Western countries. And so the big buyer of that has been China. However, if that oil stops flowing, and I think Iran's contribution is about 3 to 4% of global oil supply, and the rest of the oil that comes through the Straits of Hormuz is from countries, Gulf states. So the thing is, though, if China can't get it from Iran, they're going to go to the larger market and bid for that oil. Even though our oil didn't come from that part of the world or from Iran, people are now trying to buy out of the same pool from which our oil did come.
All right.
And
if the prices are right. Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, you're saying, so if the prices are right, basically people from any country can supply that same oil to China, so prices go up for everyone.
Yeah, the oil from different regions of the world is not quarantined. It's essentially all in a big common pool, and it's supply-demand economics, and oil companies, their mandate is to make money for investors. And if they can sell a barrel of oil for more than what they could last week, they're going to do that.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, Sam Bonello, for your interview today. We're looking forward to talk to you again. All the best.